My name is Ren Sterling, and I've always found that the most beautiful things in my life happened in silence, far away from the noise of my family. The quiet hum of an engine at 30,000 feet, the whisper of wind over a silver wing, the reverent hush of a pre-dawn briefing room, these were the spaces where I felt most myself. Family gatherings, on the other hand, were a cacophony of expectations I could never meet. That evening, we were gathered at the Gilded Perch, a restaurant in my hometown of Havenwood that prided itself on hushed tones and heavy silverware. The occasion was my mother's 65th birthday. The air smelled of lilies and roasted duck, and a hired pianist played gentle, forgettable melodies in the corner. My sister, Cassandra, sat near the head of the table, a radiant sun around which all the family planets orbited. She wore a dress the color of champagne and her grandmother's sapphires, her laughter ringing out like perfectly tuned bells as she recounted a story about a mishap at her upscale home decor boutique, Hearth and Haven. "Can you imagine?" she said, her hands gesturing dramatically. "The delivery driver drops a whole crate of hand-blown Venetian glass. A $10,000 disaster. But of course I handled it." My father beamed. "That's our Cassandra. Always in control." I was seated at the far end, a satellite in a distant, lonely orbit. Next to me was an empty chair, reserved for a +1 I hadn't brought. My presence was a quiet concession, a rare visit home from a life they didn't understand and had long since stopped asking about. As Cassandra paused for breath, she caught my eye and smiled, a bright, sharp thing. "It's so good you could make it, Ren," she announced, her voice carrying across the table. "We were starting to think you were just a rumor, a signature on a birthday card sent from some post office box in the desert." A ripple of polite laughter went around the table. My cousins, their spouses, my aunt and uncle, they all chuckled along, complicit in the gentle jest that held a lifetime of dismissiveness. I smiled back, a calm, steady expression I had perfected over years of practice. I held a secret, a quiet truth that was currently en route, following a precise flight path to this very location. In about an hour, just after the flourless chocolate torte was served, a different kind of story would begin. Let Cassandra have her moment. I had learned long ago that you don't need to fight for the spotlight when you command the sky. You just have to wait for the clouds to part. Cassandra always got the bigger piece of cake. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a foundational memory. On my 8th birthday, my mother brought out a buttercream cake decorated with a sugary bluebird. She sliced it with a silver knife, her movements precise. She gave Cassandra the corner piece, laden with a thick frosting rose and a delicate, spun sugar wing. My piece was from the middle, plain and unadorned. I remember looking from her plate to mine, a small, quiet understanding dawning in my chest. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was simply an oversight, a casual reflection of where the attention naturally fell. Growing up in Havenwood was like living in a beautifully curated, slightly suffocating snow globe. Life followed a predictable, comfortable script. Cassandra played her part flawlessly. She was the lead in the school play, the homecoming queen, the one whose framed photos lined the mantelpiece. She was bright, bubbly, and deeply rooted in the town's rich soil. She married her high school sweetheart, a man who took over his father's successful construction firm. They built a sprawling modern farmhouse on the edge of town, had 2 perfect children, and hosted the most talked-about holiday parties. Cassandra was the embodiment of Havenwood's dreams. I was different. While Cassandra practiced her cursive, I was in the garage with my grandfather, a retired mechanic, taking apart lawnmower engines and putting them back together. While she read magazines about lipstick and prom dresses, I read biographies of John Glenn and Amelia Earhart. My dreams weren't earthbound. They lived in the vast, open blue above our small town. The local airfield, a dusty strip of land where old crop dusters and Cessnas rested like sleeping birds, was my sanctuary. I'd spend hours there, just watching them take off, feeling a pang of longing so sharp it was almost a physical pain. My family tolerated my obsession as a quirky phase. "She's just a tomboy," my mother would say with a sigh. "She'll grow out of it." I didn't. I earned my pilot's license on my 17th birthday. The day I got my acceptance letter to the Air Force Academy, I came home bursting with the news. My mother was arranging flowers in a vase. She glanced at the letter. "Oh, Ren. The military? It's so severe. And you'll be so far away." My father, reading the evening paper, grunted from behind it. Tough life for a woman. Cassandra, who had just gotten engaged, wrinkled her nose. "But what will you wear? Don't you have to wear a uniform all the time?" There was no celebration, no proud announcement to the neighbors. My achievement was treated like a strange, slightly embarrassing secret. It was the first of many lines I would draw in my mind, separating the world where I was Ren Sterling, the daughter and sister, from the one where I was becoming someone else entirely. The years that followed were a blur of discipline and flight. I graduated with honors, chose to fly transport aircraft, the big, powerful workhorses of the sky, and steadily rose through the ranks. My life was a series of temporary homes, bases in Germany, Japan, Qatar, and dusty, forgotten airfields in countries my family couldn't find on a map. I learned to be fluent in the language of logistics, flight plans, and emergency protocols. I learned the profound, humbling responsibility of being trusted with $100 million aircraft and the lives of the crew inside it. I tried, at first, to share this world with them. On one of my rare trips home for Christmas, I brought my parents a framed photograph of me standing on the tarmac in front of my C-17 Globemaster, the enormous aircraft looming behind me like a gentle giant. My crew was lined up beside me, all of us smiling in the golden light of a desert sunset. My mother took it and smiled vaguely. "How lovely, dear. You all look so tidy." She placed it on the side table, and by the end of the evening, it was buried under a pile of catalogs and Cassandra's wedding album proofs. It never made it to the wall. That was the day I stopped trying to translate my life for them. I stopped sending articles about missions I'd been a part of. I stopped correcting them when they introduced me as someone who works for the government. I learned to exist in the quiet spaces of their conversations, nodding along to stories about PTA meetings and zoning board disputes. I would shrink myself to fit into the small, carefully defined box they had built for me. It was easier than trying to explain the sheer, breathtaking expanse of the sky. The last time I'd seen them all together was for my father's retirement party 2 years ago. I'd flown in for less than 48 hours, straight from a multinational training exercise in the Arctic. I was tired down to my bones, the kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. Cassandra, ever the gracious host, had printed name cards for the dinner table. Mine read, Ren. When I gently pointed it out, she'd waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honestly, Ren, it's close enough. It's not like it's on a legal document." Later that evening, she cornered me by the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand. "You know," she'd said, her tone dripping with faux concern, "it's a shame you're always so busy. Mom and Dad are getting older. They need family around. Not everyone can just jet off and play soldier." I looked at her, at the perfect makeup, the expensive jewelry, the easy confidence of someone who had never had to prove her worth to anyone in this room. "It's not a game, Cassandra," I said, my voice quiet. She just laughed, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Whatever you say, Major Mysterious." I didn't see the irony then, but I see it now. She called me mysterious because she never bothered to ask the right questions. She saw my absence as a choice to leave them, rather than a choice to build something for myself. So when the embossed invitation for my mother's 65th birthday arrived at my current station, a secure facility so classified that mail was routed through 3 different intermediaries, I didn't hesitate to RSVP yes. Something had shifted in me. It wasn't anger or a desire for revenge. It was a quiet settling, like the calm after a storm. I had spent so long navigating by their stars, trying to find a place in their constellation. Now I had my own. The night of the dinner, a critical logistics briefing for an upcoming NATO operation was scheduled for review. The protocol for such documents was strict, hand delivery by a designated officer. I could have had it routed to my hotel. I could have delayed it. But I didn't. I simply provided the time and address of the Gilded Perch. It wasn't a trap. It was an intersection. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to steer away from the collision. I was going to let my two worlds meet. The Gilded Perch was exactly as I remembered, ostentatious and suffocating. The chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a cold, brittle light on the tables. The waiters moved with a silent, practiced grace that felt more like performance than service. It was Cassandra's favorite kind of place, a stage. I arrived exactly on time, a habit ingrained by years of military precision. I wore a simple, elegant sheath dress in a deep midnight blue, my hair pulled back in a neat chignon. I was understated, civilian, designed not to cause a ripple. The hostess led me to the private dining room in the back, where the low hum of my family's chatter was already in full swing. My entrance was barely noted. A few perfunctory hello, Ren S, a brief, dry hug from my mother, and a nod from my father, who was already deep in conversation with Cassandra's husband about property taxes. Cassandra herself rose to greet me, ere kissing the space beside my cheeks. "You made it," she chirped, her voice a little too loud. "I was half expecting you to parachute in." She turned to the table. "Everyone, Ren's here. She's taken a break from her top-secret spy missions to grace us with her presence." More polite laughter. I smiled my quiet smile and took my designated seat at the far end of the table, the seat of the distant relative, the afterthought. My dinner companion was a young man, the new boyfriend of a cousin, who asked me what I did for a living. "I'm in aviation," I said simply. "Oh, cool. Like a flight attendant?" "Something like that," I replied, letting the conversation die. It was easier than explaining. For the next hour, I was a spectator at my own family gathering. I listened to Cassandra hold court, spinning tales of her boutique success, her children's achievements in private school, and her plans to remodel their kitchen with Italian marble. She was captivating, I had to admit. She built her life story with the same meticulous care she used to stage a luxury home, ensuring every detail was perfect, every angle flattering. At one point, my aunt turned to my mother and said, "You must be so proud of Cassandra. Hearth and Haven is the talk of the town." My mother preened. "She's always been such a go-getter. She takes after her father." No one looked at me. No one asked what I had been doing for the last 2 years. They didn't know that I had spent 6 months commanding a multinational airlift wing, coordinating the delivery of humanitarian aid to a flood-ravaged region. They didn't know I'd been selected for a highly competitive strategic command program, a path that was grooming me for leadership at the highest levels. They didn't know because in their world, success was measured in square footage and local press clippings. My accomplishments were written in flight logs and confidential reports, in a language they couldn't read. The main courses were cleared, and the waiter brought out the birthday cake, a towering confection of chocolate and raspberry that Cassandra had, of course, designed herself. As my mother made a show of blowing out the candles, I felt a familiar pang, not of jealousy, but of a deep, sorrowful loneliness. I was in a room full of people who shared my blood, yet I had never felt more foreign. It was then that a waiter approached the table, his movements discreet. He bent down and spoke quietly to my father, who was seated at the head. My father frowned, then looked down the long table at me. "Ren," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "There's someone here for you." A delivery. Cassandra's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "A delivery? Here? Don't tell me you're having Amazon packages sent to Mom's birthday dinner." I calmly placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "I'll just be a moment," I said, my voice even. "It's just some work documents I was expecting." I could feel every eye in the room on my back as I walked away from the table, my low heels making a soft, steady rhythm on the polished floor. I walked past the bar, past the grand piano, and into the restaurant's opulent lobby. And there he was, standing near the entrance, perfectly framed by the dark wood and velvet curtains, was First Lieutenant David Reyes. He was young, sharp, and ramrod straight in his formal service dress uniform, the one with the polished silver buttons and the rows of colorful ribbons over the breast pocket. He wasn't in a flight suit. This was the uniform of official business, of respect. His face was impassive, his bearing a study in military decorum. He saw me approach, and his posture, if possible, became even more rigid. As I came to a stop a few feet in front of him, he executed a flawless, crisp salute, his gloved hand slicing through the air to his brow. His voice was clear and formal, loud enough to carry back toward the private dining room. "Colonel Sterling, ma'am. I have the secure courier pouch you requested. General Armstrong sends his personal regards and apologizes for the intrusion." The world didn't stop, but the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to dip into a sudden, profound silence. I could hear the faint, distant clink of a fork against a plate from our room. I held his gaze for a beat, letting the moment hang in the air, a silent, powerful note. Then, I returned the salute with the same sharp precision I had practiced 1,000 times. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "At ease, ma'am." He handed me the sealed, official-looking leather pouch. It was heavy with the weight of its contents and the weight of what it represented. "Your transport is waiting?" I asked, my voice low and professional. "Yes, ma'am. Ready for your signal." "Thank you, Reyes. That will be all." He nodded once, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated respect, and then turned and walked out of the restaurant, his back straight, his steps measured. I stood there for a moment, holding the pouch, before turning to walk back to my family. As I re-entered the dining room, I saw it. The shock, the confusion, the dawning, uncomfortable recalculation on every single face. Cassandra's mouth was slightly agape, the witty retort she was surely forming having died on her lips. My mother was staring at the leather pouch in my hands as if it were a live grenade. My father, for the first time all evening, looked at me, truly looked at me, with an expression of utter bewilderment. I returned to my seat at the end of the table, placed the pouch in my handbag, and picked up my dessert fork. "Sorry about that," I said into the thick, stunned silence. "Please, continue." I think Mom was about to open her gifts. But no one moved. The party, for all intents and purposes, was over. The story had changed, and they hadn't been given the new script. Back at the table, the silence was a living entity. It pressed in on us, heavy and awkward. The cheerful piano music from the corner of the restaurant suddenly sounded jarring, intrusive. My cousin's boyfriend was staring at me with a newfound, almost fearful respect. My mother kept nervously adjusting her napkin in her lap. It was my father who finally spoke, clearing his throat loudly. "Colonel," he asked, the title sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "You're a colonel?" I met his gaze directly, without flinching. "Yes. I was promoted last year. 16 years of service. A lifetime spent in a world they knew nothing about, summed up in a single, stark rank." I could see them all doing the mental arithmetic, trying to reconcile the quiet, overlooked girl they remembered with the woman who was saluted in the lobby of a fancy restaurant. Cassandra found her voice first, though it was strained, stripped of its usual breezy confidence. "Well, that was quite the performance, Ren. Did you plan that? To have some guy in a costume show up and make a scene?" The accusation was classic Cassandra, an attempt to reframe my reality as a theatrical ploy, something designed to manipulate. It was the only way she could process it and maintain her position at the center of the universe. I didn't rise to the bait. I simply answered with the quiet truth. That was Lieutenant Reyes, one of the junior officers on my command staff. He was following standard protocol for the delivery of classified materials. It wasn't a performance. "It's just my job." "Your command staff," My mother whispered, her eyes wide. You have a staff? This, more than anything, seemed to stun her. The idea of me not just participating, but leading. Of being in charge. I'm the wing commander for the 437th Airlift Wing, I said, offering the information freely for the first time. It's a big job. It comes with a lot of responsibility. Cassandra pushed her half-eaten cake away, her appetite gone. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette she would normally never commit. Her eyes, for the first time, held no mockery, only a raw, wounded confusion. Why wouldn't you tell us? Any of this? A promotion to colonel. That's a huge deal. We would have celebrated. Or something. The words hung in the air, so full of unexamined assumptions. That they would have known how to celebrate it. That they would have wanted to. Would you have? I asked, my voice gentle but firm. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. When I graduated from the academy, you said it was a tough life. When I made major, I called to tell you, and the conversation turned to the problems you were having with the plumber in the guest bathroom. The last time I was home, Cassandra, you called me Major Mysterious and told me I was playing soldier. I let the words settle. I wasn't listing grievances. I was presenting evidence. I was showing them the pattern they had refused to see. You never asked, I said softly, looking directly at my sister. Not really. You never asked what a typical day was like. You never asked what my responsibilities were, or what it felt like to land AC, 17 in a crosswind with zero visibility. You asked when I was coming home, as if home was the only real place in the world, and everything else was just a temporary detour. Cassandra shrank back in her chair, a flicker of something, shame, maybe, or regret, crossing her face. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands, silent. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. We worried, Ren. All that flying, those strange places. We wanted you to be safe. To be here. I know you did, Mom, I said, and I meant it. I understood their fear, their desire for a life for me that they could comprehend, one that fit neatly within the borders of Havenwood. But while you were worrying, I was growing. I was building a life. A very full, very rewarding life. I found a different kind of family, a different way to be of service. I just wish, for once, you could have been proud of that life, instead of just being scared of it. The truth landed in the center of the table and sat there, undeniable. I had spent my entire life trying to be seen by them, waiting for an acknowledgement that never came. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had seen myself. That was enough. I slowly gathered my purse and stood up. The movement was decisive, final. The cake is lovely, Mom. Happy birthday. My voice was warm, sincere. The anger and hurt that had simmered for years had finally dissipated, leaving only a quiet clarity. I have an early briefing tomorrow, so I need to go. My father started to stand, a belated gesture of paternal duty. Ren, wait. But I was already moving. I walked away from the table, from the stunned faces and the half-eaten cake, from the whole beautiful, suffocating diorama of a life I no longer belonged to. As I reached the lobby, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I would see. I stepped out of the cloying, overheated restaurant and into the cool, clean night air. It felt like coming up for a breath after being underwater for a very long time. I looked up at the sky. There were no stars visible, only the dull orange glow of the town's lights. But I knew they were there, cold and distant and beautiful, burning in the darkness. My stars. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I had finally learned to navigate by my own light. The drive back to my sterile airport hotel was quiet. The streets of Havenwood, the town that had once been my entire world, looked foreign, like a movie set I was just passing through. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt light. The weight of a lifetime of unspoken expectations, of trying to be a version of myself that fit their narrative, had lifted. It was a strange, hollow, and profoundly peaceful feeling. I didn't hear from Cassandra that night or the next day. There was no angry text, no tearful phone call, no carefully worded email demanding an explanation. There was only silence. And in its own way, that silence was the most honest communication we'd had in years. It was an admission that there was nothing left to say. The gap between our worlds had become too vast to bridge with words. The next morning, at 0400 hours, I was on the tarmac. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of jet fuel and damp asphalt. The sky was just beginning to soften from black to a deep, bruised purple at the horizon. My crew was already there, conducting their pre-flight checks under the floodlights, their movements efficient and sure. They were young, dedicated, and they looked to me for guidance not because of my name or my family, but because of the rank on my collar and the experience in my eyes. My second-in-command, a sharp young major named Chin, handed me a clipboard with the weather reports. "Crosswinds are a little gusty out of the west, Colonel, but nothing we can't handle." "Acknowledged, Major," I said, scanning the data. "Let's make it a smooth ride." "Yes, ma'am." There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. Just respect. The kind of respect that isn't given, but earned. It's earned in flight simulators at 2 a.m. It's earned by making the right call under unimaginable pressure. It's earned by showing up every single day and being better than you were the day before. As the sun began to rise, painting the underbellies of the clouds in shades of rose and gold, we climbed into the cockpit. The complex array of lights and dials glowed in the dim cabin, a familiar, comforting constellation. I settled into my seat, the captain's seat, and put on my headset. The low hum of the aircraft systems was a soothing song. This was my sanctuary. This was my home. Looking out at the endless runway, I thought of my family, back in Havenwood, probably sitting around a breakfast table, talking about the weather, the neighbors, anything but the events of last night. They would, eventually, absorb it into the family lore. Cassandra would likely recast the story, making it a bizarre anecdote about her strange, dramatic sister. They would smooth over the cracks and continue on in their beautiful, predictable world. And I was okay with that, because I had finally understood something essential. You can't force people to see you. You can only be yourself, so fully and unapologetically that you no longer need them to. Some people are meant to be rooted in the earth, to tend to the hearths and havens of the world. Others are meant for the sky. My family may have given me my name, but it was the sky that gave me my identity. And as the tower cleared us for takeoff and the powerful engines roared to life, pressing me back into my seat, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I was no longer a satellite in someone else's orbit. I was a star, burning with my own fire, navigating a boundless and beautiful universe of my own making. And I was, finally, flying free.